Now, when we go into the untold history of Native American enslavement by Dina Whitaker, long before the transatlantic African slave trade in North America, Europeans were conducting and enslaving indigenous people, beginning with Christopher Columbus on Haiti in 1492. European colonists used their enslavement as weapon warfare, and indigenous people themselves used enslavement as a tactic for survival. Every European nation that colonized North America enslaved indigenous people to perform tasks, construction, plantation, mining, and North American continent and outposts in the Caribbean, European cities. European colonizers of South America also engaged in indigenous people as part of their colonization strategy. Now, this does not go with the narrative that we have been given far as the slave trade. Now, this is pre-slave trade history. Let's walk.
Chose to finance the conquest of the West Indies by selling Native American slaves. And he characterized it as his granjeria, or granary. In other words, it was the granary that was going to pay for the conquest. That is, Native American bodies. And Columbus himself sent at least 3,000 and possibly as many as 6,000 or more Native American slaves to Europe. This begins as early as 1493. On his return voyage, he takes about 24 Native Americans to Portugal and Spain. In the subsequent voyages, many, many more are sent, men and
Columbus,
women.
when he get out there, they're using the indigenous people to help enslave their own. 1493, Spanish settlers enslaved the Taino of Hispaniola. Spain found Santo Domingo, the first of many towns in the Caribbean island. Location Haiti, the Dominican Republic. Spanish colonists forced native Taino people, pain and death, to perform almost all labor on the island. Christopher Columbus, who needs to demonstrate the world finding no gold, loads the ship with Taino. During the next 4 decades, slavery contributed to the deaths of 7 million Tainos. The Spanish conquest of the Tainos. I found very islands filled with people without number, and all of them I have taken possession for hiding. This Columbus. As soon as I arrived in the Indies in the first island, which I found took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give information on whatever the point. On December 5th, 6th, 1492, faithful wind led Columbus to the island of Haiti, which would have been a very, very wealthy place at the time. They brought us parrots, balls of cotton, spears, and many other things. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. On Christmas night, the biggest ship, Santa Maria, sank in the harbor with remnants Columbus' fortune. 1493, taking with him 6 Taino captives on the cargo, parrots, plants, and gold. The purpose of Columbus' second voyage was to colonize, control, and then exploit the island. When we talk about the Timucuan people, they are prehistoric people, occupied northern Florida and the portion of Georgia reaching as far as the Altima River. The Altima is one of the great treasures of the eastern, pronounced Altima at the confluence of the Ocmulgee and the Oconee rivers. The Creek Seminole, possibly Cherokee Indians, used the river for fishing, hunting, their main mode of transportation, because the waterways were highways and the locations of many trading posts. Now, the name Altima is from an immigrant Yamasee Indian group descended from the interior chieftains, known as the Altima de Tama, located on the Kenny River below Middlevich, visited by Hernando de Soto in 1540. Now, the chieftain was forced into slavery. So these Indians would be forced into slavery by their enemies who teamed up with the Spanish, but rebelled eventually and settled in St. Augustine until the Spaniards evacuated the fort and they headed towards Cuba. Now, let's get over to Peru. Now, when we listen to, again, the institution, the first Africans arrived as enslaved people with conquerors in 1521, and some taken by force, colonists to work for no payment. 1525, 1529, 37, Francisco Pizarro was granted permits to import 363 Africans to colonial Peru. A large group of Africans were captured in order to provide by force labor. Listen, family, for public construction, building, bridges, and road systems. They also fought alongside conquistadors as soldiers and worked as personal servants and bodyguards. 1533, enslaved Afro-Peruvians accompanied Spaniards in the conquest of Cusco. Now, when we go to the book, The Cambridge World History of Slavery, Volume 2, AD 500, AD 1420, by Craig, speaks of this form of indigenous servitude or slavery or labor that were amongst these people of Peru. Now, the empire heavy labor, the building of roads, towns, granaries, and the agriculture production on behalf of the state were never performed by chattel slaves. Check. So what are Africans? Now, since these people are melanated, someone's going to write over their story, but let's walk. But rather by communities giving temporary donations, whether forced or voluntary, other times energy, the community donated labor time called mid mita. This was conceptual category of central political life in the Andes that the Spanish later retained the word mita and used to require the indigenous to build cities, labors, and mines and work newly established plantations. Well, hold on, man. Why when we go into the Cambridge story of the slavery there, they're saying that the Spanish are getting the indigenous people to perform the same acts that they said that they got the Africans to perform. What's going on here? Now, the Incas were paid their army in such cloth, dressed their noble families, and traded in food. After the conquest of the Incas sent the officials every year to every village to choose additional. They said they brought Africans over here to build roads, something that they don't even have in Africa. That ain't no cap, because that system is based off the system of America. When you want to talk about building roads and you talking about Peru or Incans, they are masters of it. Okay, they've been doing it a while. You have what's called the Inca road system, which is an ancient pre-transatlantic slave trade. The Inca road system formed a network known as the Royal Highway, became a valuable part of the Inca Empire. Roads facilitated the movement of armies, people, and goods across plains, deserts, mountains. They connected settlements, administrative centuries, and provided important physical symbols of imperial power and control. Inca's roads were built and lasting, with many incorporating bridges, what they said they had Africans building, causeways, stairways. Many also had small stations and sometimes larger luxurious complexes dotted along 20 kilometers or so where travelers could spend the night and refresh. The Andean road system is listed in UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. So they didn't need an African to build it. That's why when we're listening to these institutions or a narrative, so someone's putting this narrative out there and they're doing it on purpose and they're writing over it and they're using science as the excuse. Let's walk. Even when we're speaking about the colonization of these areas in Spain, let's go to the hierarchy there. Who's the king? Who's the guy in charge? Who's making the call for the Spanish to make these plays? Well, here's a painting in Loco Museum, Peru, depicts Charles V, Carlos Quintos, the king. The people who calling the shot are actually. Now we see this Spanish exploration as they moving around, shaking and baking. Now Texas, first to come to Texas was Esteban the Moor. As long as the concept of African Americans current, as long as African American history is seen in the beginning with the slavery to Africa, Esteban important because he is the first African American. Okay, well when he got here, he was the first enslaved African to ride to Florida. Documented name of Esteban long before the explorers Lewis and Clark crossed the traversed the lands and later become United States throughout the southwest to the Pacific Ocean. Now this guy was under attack by Native American residents in Galveston Island. And right here, shout out to the family, we went out there. Here's a depiction of him coming. He's a melanated man. He's also a conquistador. This is coming from 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro by Henry Louis Gates. And right here lets us know that these people that are coming here to colonize are also melanated, and they are also of African descent, but not West African, but North African. And on the other source, like it said, who played a major part in the colonization of America. So when you hear this African title, be careful because our free people are from North Africa, and that is where the original name derived from. The Indians that kidnapped them was a people called the Karankawa. They lived around Galveston Bay, Corpus Christi area. Right here in Tina Juarez called No Man Master. The Karankawas who visited the Tonka was highly skilled fishermen. Okay, the Karankawas were demonstrating a technique they used in the bays between the coast and the Gulf Islands where they often made their camp. They were tall, dark-skinned people. I found them to be quite friendly, and they had a reputation amongst the Spanish for being fierce warriors. We all can fight. We Indians. Some even said they were cannibals, but this was not true. They were simply a people who refused to submit to Spanish authority, and for that reason, they would be enslaved. Shout out to my elite. Now let's talk about the Indians who were enslaved in Virginia by settlers, traders shortly after founding the Jamestown. This time, Atlantic slave trade was at its peak, flooded Virginia with cheap African labor, they say. Let's walk through it. At this time, Virginians who required men and women to serve or tobacco field mostly relied on indigent service and enslaved Indians. Europeans sold guns and enslaved captives. An existing indigenous trade market encouraged allied tribes to provide these enslaved people by targeting Indians and bringing them to English settlement. Now let's walk. There were laws pertaining to slaves and service in Virginia, 1629-1672, from William Walter Henry. The statutes at law has been a collection of laws of Virginia from the first session of legislature this year, 1619, volume 1, New York. So 1670, the governor of Virginia answered Sir Berkeley in 1671, when number of plantations serving and slaves, how many parishes are on your plantation? He answered, we suppose, I am very sure we do not much miscount, that there is Virginia above 40 40,000 person, men and women and children, which there are 2,000 black slaves, 6,000 Christian servants for a short time. The rest are born in the country or have come in settlement and seek and better in their conditions in growing country. What number of English, Scots, and Irish in the 7 years last come yearly to plant enable within your government? As also what blacks or slaves have been brought within the same time? The answer: yearly. We suppose that there comes in a serving about 1,500, of which most are English, few Scots, and few Irish, and not above 2 or 3 ships of Negroes in 7 years. And not above 2 or 3 ships of Negroes in 7 years. Okay? Now this is 1671. He telling him he got a lot of British there. He been getting a handful of Irish and Scottish workers, but far as Negroes coming on ships, and Negroes, they could be coming from the Caribbean, not specifically Africa, because they didn't mention Africa. But he's saying that shit, he ain't got but about 2 or 3 ships in 7 years. Let's walk. October 1670. What time? Indians to serve. Where some disputes have arisen within Indians taken in war by other nations, and by that nation they taken them and sold them to English as servants for life. Okay? It resolved in enacting all servants not being Christians imported into colony by shipping shall be slaves for lives, but shall come by land shall serve, and boys and girls until 30 years of age, and men and women 12 years or no longer. So the Indians, they say, are gonna be hit with a case to serve as slavery for life. These are laws in Virginia again. Between 1660 and 1715, as many as 50,000 indigenous people were captured by other indigenous tribe members and sold into enslavement in Virginia, Carolina colonies. Most of them were captured and were part of feared indigenous confederacy known as the Westos, forced their home on Lake Erie. The Westos began conducting military raids of enslaved people in Georgia, Florida in 1659. Their successful raids eventually forced the survivors into a new social identity, building new police large enough to protect themselves against enslavers. And so this is going to start up in 1638 to 46. He was the Director General of New Netherlands, Dutch West Indies Company. He's going to start a war, Mohawk-Mohican War. The first test to the Dutch relationship erupted in the form of native conflict known as the Mohawk-Mohican War. The Mohawks attempted to monopolize the trade by denying the French Indians free passage to trade through Dutch while also driving out the Mohicans. The war became famously known as the first indigenous conflict in North America and have directly erupted and tension created introduction to European trade. And this will start a slave trade among the indigenous people, enslaving other indigenous people. All these are too. Oh, we gonna work. Roger Williams, this the guy who's gonna bring over the Baptists in America. During his life, he supported, facilitated, and participated in the slavery of indigenous people who were captured during war. Okay, so we get slavery with the Pequot War. You're gonna have a Pequot War that's gonna go down. They say the captives we took, we divided, intended to keep them as servants, but they could not endure the yoke. Few of them continued any considerable time with their master. Master Puck Pequot oral tradition has played a key role in preserving memory of this history, which is until fairly recent had not been widely studied. So a lot of people don't even want to talk about it, but it's a goddamn fact. During this time throughout the war, many captured Pequot men were killed, while women and children were given colonies and spoils of war, placed in captivity under other tribes, and had to pledge their allegiance to English or transfer to the Massachusetts Bay Colony into slavery and shipped to Caribbean islands and British outposts. Okay, ports and harbor. Right here we have Port Royal in South Carolina. Now the untold history of Native American enslavement, nowhere there is more documentation of enslavement of indigenous people than in South Carolina. The location of original colony in South Carolina, established 1670, it estimated between 1650 and 1730, at least 50,000 indigenous people, and likely more due to the transactions hidden to avoid paying government tariff and taxes, were exported by English alone to the Caribbean outposts. Between 1670 and 1770, far more indigenous people were exported than Africans were imported in southern coastal regions. Entire tribes were more often exterminated through enslavement compared to disease or war. Okay, they told you they died of chicken pox. No, right here it tells you they were exterminated through enslavement, not disease or war. They were alive, but these people were captured through the art of war. And we see there are other Indians pushing the line who were coming down from the north in these migrations in the Great Lakes down to Virginia, and now they coming to the south.
Other colonialists, example in South Carolina, the English are very astute to also take advantage of existing animosities. And they get some of the tribes to provide a lot of the slaves And by that mean, they acquire, for example, lots of Choctaw slaves from Mississippi are among the largest group that are enslaved and are sold to South Carolina, to the West Indies, and to New England, and held in South Carolina. There are also tribes even west of the Mississippi that get raided and are brought in as slaves. Florida is cleaned up. Firstly, all the Indians that remained in Florida after the Spanish period are cleaned out by the English and sold as slaves. The Indian people who later live in Florida are primarily people moving south to get away from the whites. Seminoles, for example. They moved south from what is now Alabama and Georgia. But the native inhabitants, by and large, are enslaved. They're Christians, they have Spanish surnames, but they're brought north here to South Carolina and become part of the slave population.
So that's what we've been speaking about. So I hope y'all follow me. Louisiana, we're in Louisiana with it. It was inhabited by Native Americans. The European explorers came in 17. You had the Natchitoches, they had the Caddo, the Homer, some of the dialects. You had the Attakapas southwestern Louisiana. The Attakapas also inhabited London Parish. Some were buried in the Catholic Church. The Chitimacha in the southeastern parish, Iberia. St. Mary, Lower St. Martin, St. James, St. John the Baptist, Charles Jefferson, Orleans, St. Bernard, the Plaquemines, the Bayou Luga, part of the Choctaw Nation in the area directly north of the Chitimacha in the parish of St. Helena, Washington, Eastern Baton Rouge, Western Baton Rouge, Livingston, and St. Tammany, the Homer in the east, the Ovella, part of the Natchez Nation, along the Mississippi River, parishes of Madison, East Carroll, West Carroll. When friends became colonized in the Gulf, they came down the bay. You had Chitimacha people who ruled this area here. The Chitimacha had developed a highly efficient economy through seasonal hunting. Within a few short years, French contacted Chitimacha found themselves suffering through a war unlike they had previously endured for 11 years. The French colonial government of Louisiana and Indian allies waged campaigns doing what? Destroying many communities and taking captives. This abrupt shattering of Chitimacha life began in 1702 when the unauthorized French attacked the village of Bayou La Fortune and some 20 women and children and slaves. Besieged by Chickasaw, attacked 4 years later, the Kennesaw Indians moved downriver from the previous homeland and settled among the Bayou Golas, Louisiana, but then drove the host away. Chitimachas captured, sold at Mobile for 200 livres and sent furs to settlements of Mobile, Biloxi. Some enslaved Chitimachas purchased by men who brought to the Natchitoches in New Orleans at the end of 1710. Two Chitimacha sisters, Jean and Marie, they were sold in enslavement by French and the Indian allies and scattering as well as shattering. During the decade of war in the southern edge and the vast shadow zone, scores of Chitimacha women and children became the core French and Louisiana initial slave population, while others were trafficked from the Gulf to the Caribbean during the height of the war. All of this is taking place, and the only story we was given was we came here from Africa, we don't remember what else happened, and get in where you fit in. Black power.